From the studios of the Optimism Institute, welcome to the Blue Sky Podcast. I'm your host, Bill Burke, and in every Blue Sky episode, we'll be speaking to leaders, researchers, and thinkers whose stories and insights will remind us that there is always blue sky above. Sometimes you just have to get your head above the clouds to see it. Experts in the field tell us that loneliness and a lack of belonging are drivers of our mental health challenges, and having these feelings make it harder to be optimistic. On past episodes of Blue Sky, we've spoken with guests who are working to address these challenges, and today we add another to this list. Nichole Argo has a background in social psychology, and as you'll hear, she's taken her interest in studying conflicts and moved into finding ways to head these off before they become an issue. Nichole is currently the founder and director of research at the Togetherup Institute, a consulting firm that leverages the science of social and behavioral psychology to support nonprofits, philanthropy, municipalities, and private companies with research, diagnostic tools, design strategies, and impact frameworks for building cultures of belonging and innovative local models of democracy. Before this, she founded the Needham Resilience Network in her Massachusetts hometown, and now she's co-hosting Reimagining Us, a podcast designed to help us all build connection and community. Previously, Nichole was a social psychologist at Carnegie Mellon University. She holds an MA in International Policy Studies from Stanford, an MS in Political Science from MIT, and a PhD in Social Psychology from the New School for Social Research. I hope you enjoy this Blue Sky conversation with Nichole Argo as much as I did. Nichole Argo, welcome to the Blue Sky Podcast.
Thank you, Bill. It's really great to be here.
It's a pleasure to meet you. I'm very interested in the work you're doing, and you major in the field of social psychology. Can you tell us what is social psychology and what is it about that drew your interest?
Sure. Social psychology is really the study of our social identities and how we behave in groups, which, includes organizations or communities. So it touches everything from business to politics to physiology and everything. And I came to social psychology through a really circuitous route, which is, I was always interested in conflict. And originally I thought that meant I should study political science,
Right.
The people who study war. But as I really started to understand my own interests and think about my own life, I realized that I cared about what was happening in people's minds. How did they perceive one another? What were their intentions, their worldviews, and then how did their interactions, ratchet that up to get to a level of conflict? And then how to prevent that, and how do we de-escalate and bring people into a place of cooperation and a bigger we?
So an interesting conflict. So are you personally comfortable with conflict? Are you good with conflict? We've actually had people on the show who have tried to coach people through that or coach corporations through that, and a workplace that's open to criticism and conflict. Is that something that you're comfortable with and good at, or is it more you study to get better yourself?
I do think that research is me search for most people at some level.
Yes.
But listen, my body goes through the same physiological reactions that everyone's does when they feel threatened or hurt or afraid in a relational context. But I do think, it's a muscle. And the more that you learn to sit with your own internal conflicts, with other conflicts in the room, the more that you hold it and even appreciate it, appreciate the pregnant pauses, really listen to someone when you're in it, and sort of learn yourself, right? When are you being triggered? When should you pause? When is someone else being triggered? How can you focus on the thing that really matters in those moments, which is usually the conversation or the
Yeah.
values and stories that are informing the way people are feeling, like
Yep.
you can kind of get past it. So that was
Yeah.
a tangent, but I'm
No,
getting
no,
better
that
is
answered
the
my
answer.
question. No, and it's interesting because I imagine even in the time since you've been studying this, the world has changed to the point too where I guess it's a form of conflict, but just sort of online hot takes, people going after each other, read the comments on the online newspaper and it's a couple of rational comments and then people just start fighting with each other from a safe distance, I would argue. And I think we also feel like, I'd interested to know what you think, that we always have to have an opinion on everything. I had a guest on, Kevin Kelly, who said, you don't have to attend every argument you're invited to. And I feel like we have trouble as a society not accepting those invitations. Does that ring true to you?
Yeah, I mean, we would be hard pressed to find an American and maybe beyond, right? That
Yeah.
doesn't feel as if conflict and a lack of listening and just constant triggering is outside
Yeah.
their door
Yes.
almost all the time. And I think some of the most fascinating guests that we had on our podcast as well were folks who talked a lot about conflict transformation and
Yes.
what do we do? And we know a lot about high conflict. That's what Amanda Ripley would call it. We know
Yes.
that when we're in it, we are not exposing ourselves to all the complexity of an issue or a person, right? Things become binary. If it's an issue, it's like for or against, it's good or bad.
Yeah.
And if it's a person, it's the same. They're
Right.
on my side or they're not on my side. We're not seeing the
Right.
fact that they're a dog owner and a basketball player and they maybe, did military service or are a great dad or mom.
Yep.
And so really this idea of actually, I mean, this became the whole goal of our podcast is how do we
Yeah.
identify when we're in those high conflict us versus them moments,
Yeah.
and then what do we do to transform it to a place of curiosity and complexity and relationship.
Yep. So we're going to talk about Reimagining Us, which is your podcast. First, because I think it came in this order, was Together Up. So can you explain to us what caused you to found Together Up? Where'd you get the name? What was the purpose? What were you trying to accomplish?
So I founded Together Up, or I came to the idea of doing so by accident.
Okay.
I was the director of research at a nonprofit that does violence prevention. It's called Over Zero. And I was working on something called the Belonging Barometer. It was a big report that we did, and in the midst of all that, it was an incredibly busy time, and there
Yeah.
was a lot going on in the world. It was like 2020.
Ugh.
That was another time when we had a lot of just a blowing up nationally of tensions um, and what happened is that my local community in Needham, Massachusetts, was itself kind of dissolving.
Hmm.
It was in a difficult place. We had had a 350% increase in hate incidents, and there was an incident, a misuse of force by the local police against a Black man, which led to just another layer of polarizing in society
Yeah.
and massive mistrust. A lot of demographic change here, and just really some challenges in integrating and growing as a community. And so I realized that we needed to do this belonging work ourselves, and was asked to create an initiative. Um, Ultimately, I founded something called the Needham Resilience Network. We call it the
Ah.
NRN. And it was really a decision to put 30 identity and stakeholder leaders,
Hmm.
as well as key town officials, into a room together to build relationships across silos,
Wow.
to anchor in the language of belonging, to learn skills and how to communicate across differences, and then really importantly to co-create to a solution to a local challenge. So to work on something together.
Yeah.
And it was a 2-year initiative. It's now continuing with new cohorts.
Wow.
And it was life changing for
Really?
me and transformative. for our town. And I talk about this elsewhere, but just really seeing people and their understandings of one another, the bigger we of Needham,
Yes.
come into being after such just a caustic period.
Yeah.
It
Yeah.
it was incredible, and I just actually I couldn't think of doing anything else. I wanted to bring that to other communities and really support this work in any way that we could.
I appreciated learning how Nichole went from an interest in studying conflicts to a passion for trying to prevent them. And she wisely advises us to remember that we invariably have a lot in common with other people, including those with whom we might disagree. Getting disparate members of her hometown to meet regularly around the same table helped them all realize that despite their different viewpoints, they all cared about Needham, and after getting past these artificial barriers, they managed to do great work together. Getting back to our conversation, I asked Nichole to talk about how her work is evolving as she moves beyond the Needham Resilience Network.
So our big mission is really to build a movement of communities that want to work together across differences. And so, what are the models for that? Where are the stories of where that's happening? What are tools that enable people to go ahead and do that? Um, and so, part of this year's work is putting those tools out. And there's a variety of resources that we'll be bringing public in the next couple of months. But the other part is identifying communities that might already be doing this work,
Hmm.
and starting a community of practice to what's the proof of concept here? Can we show real gains in terms of social cohesion, in terms of economic growth, in terms of less violence, better education or problem solving, or there's all sorts of things that belonging is correlated with. And so I think really growing this ability for local communities to think differently about
Yeah.
how they govern themselves, and
Yeah.
how they connect together to thrive, and then getting the word out about that is part of it. And then the other piece that I think is a little bit unique about Together Up is that we really focus on institutionalizing relationships across differences. So there's a
Hmm.
huge thrust that is a good thing for our world today, towards connecting. We need more
Yeah.
connection. We have a loneliness epidemic.
Yeah.
We have the health implications of that, and the psychological and mental health implications of that. We also have, unless we are being very careful and intentional in our design, there's a risk that we'll build connection with the people who are just like us, right? We're pretty socially segregated today. And so a lot of Together Up's purpose and motivation is, how do we ensure that we're building those connections across differences, any kind of difference, right?
Yeah. Right.
Socioeconomic, race,
Right.
partisan, cat and dog lovers.
Yeah.
The point is, let's get exposed to things that aren't in our silo, and let's complicate the narratives that we get from the national level about who people are,
Right.
and become neighbors.
Yeah. Amazing. Boy, there's a lot there. One of the things I found interesting about your work and refreshing in a lot of ways is your focus, if I have it right, is more local than national. I think one of the challenges we have today is, I come to this work as sort of a history buff, and I love thinking about trends, and a lot of what we're going through today is not new. A lot of it is. I think one of the things that's new is this obsession with federal government, with Washington, with GOP and Democrat, the red and blue. But what really impacts your life the most is the town of Needham, or the neighborhood that you live in, or right. And it seems to me that you are taking a much more of a local approach than a lot of people might. Is that fair to say? And if it is, why do you think that's the best way to go, for at least for you?
I think that was fair to say. and maybe still is, although I'm hearing more and more attention to, we were talking earlier about Sam Pressler, and
Yes.
Seth Kaplan is another one who
Yes.
does a lot of local level work. And I think philanthropy, I've done some work, research, and thought leadership work with folks that are focusing on the local more and more. So I'm happy to say that there's a groundswell of folks, that recognize it to matter. But for me, the local community aspect, I think, was driven home in my own experience here. I've always
Yeah.
done violence prevention and belonging work at a national level, and that has always been meaningful. But it wasn't until I really was part of the relationship building and the problem solving locally that I understood the power beyond just changing the way people think, but changing the way they behave, changing the
Yeah.
opportunities they have to grow those things. And and I think that was really huge. But in terms of why it makes sense, my thoughts are threefold.
Right.
One, local community is how we understand and touch and practice democracy. And whatever's happening at the national level is just too far away, and it's too
Yeah.
complicated to feel real or
Yes.
known. But if we feel it in our communities, we can project it up. We can see our
Yes.
voice at work here around us and
Yep.
believe that that's working at the
Yes.
higher levels. So, at a time when we're having just major doubts throughout the
Yes.
country about
Yes.
our governance, our national governance, I think the way to address them is not to talk more about it. Nobody
Yes.
trusts anyone else's sources anyway. It's
Right.
to change our local communities. But the other piece is not about democracy. It is that because Americans are socially segregated today
Mm.
and divided, our geographic communities are some of our only third spaces these days. And
Mm.
third spaces is just a word to talk about the places outside of work and family where we
Yes.
can still find common ground and get to know one another. And in these spaces, in our local communities, we have shared interests and values, right?
Right.
We care about our schools and our hospitals and everyone's well-being. And we're in relationship with real humans, like our kids' basketball coach.
Yep.
And we can see, even if they're across partisan, they're also a thousand other things, right?
Yeah.
So we can break down our stereotypes and attitudes and become real and be our best real selves. And then lastly, the reason for me in going local, I'm going to use a word that I think is used so much, maybe it doesn't mean anything anymore, but it's resilience.
Mm.
And what I mean here, Amanda Ripley
Mm.
has written about how 90% of counties from 2011 to 2021 received federal disaster funds. That is a
Wow.
huge percentage.
Wow.
And many of those, it was because of climate or extreme weather.
Yep. Yep.
But the fact is, you personally may not have been, your town might have not have been part of a county that experienced that, but this will continue. Like, we're
Sure.
not expecting it to go away. In fact, the challenges that are confronting our communities going forward absolutely cannot be defeated. We're going to have to be resilient to things, like cyber attacks, pandemics, extreme weather.
Sure.
And we know that resilience relies on social cohesion. We have tons of studies on this, and that's local. So, our best fixes to our local problems will be hyper local, and we are each other's best resources.
I love that. Yeah. I mean, it makes me think. I've mentioned this so many times, but when Fred Rogers talked about his mother saying, look for the helpers. When these awful things happen in the local community, the local outpouring of support is so staggering. Always. Pick any part of the country, getting back to, all these, we think we have these perceived differences, blue state, red state, whatever. When a hurricane comes, when there's fires taking out Pacific Palisades and Altadena, when there's, North Carolina getting, And it's local. Obviously, the federal government comes into support, but the really beautiful stories are local. You talked about this idea of all the things we have in common. And I've talked to other folks who say, when you sit down with someone or a group and coming in that there's differences, you're on this side of the school board issue and I'm on that side, whatever. Just going through the exercise of listing all the things you agree upon before you get to the difference, he's like, this one guest I had, he's like, every time you do it, it's this huge list. And then it's, oh yeah, and I don't think we should spend on that turf field or whatever. But once you get to that point, it's like, you've agreed you all want a good education for our kids. You agree that you like going to the Friday night football games. You agree, and it seems like you've taken a similar approach in some of your work. And I think it would do us all a lot of good to think about that in so many other instances.
I agree. I actually think we had John Saroof from Essential Partners and Melissa Weintraub from Resetting the Table join us for an episode on Reimagining Us. And they each shared some of their favorite tools. And one of them, sounds a lot like what you're describing, which is like, how do you, when people come to a room, just simply remind us that we are people and we put our shoes on the same way. We might have had the same thing for breakfast. We laugh at crazy things, all of the things that make you feel closer and warmer towards someone.
Yeah.
And whatever the prompt is, to remind people of those larger overarching humanalities, maybe I'll just throw out that word for now.
Yeah.
It puts into perspective the difference, right? Because differences actually make life better.
Yeah.
When they challenge our thoughts and we hone our thinking to make it better, when they maybe broaden our horizons, they certainly make food more interesting. And I think that there's something about reminding people of that before they dig into, okay, now what do we want to do about this?
Right.
So they're answering that question not as enemies or scary opponents, but as like people who have a shared value and want to come to the best solution. And it changes the whole game. I agree with you. John Shroof, what he said that I totally agreed with is once you start to learn these principles, there's actually not a room you walk into in your professional life, in your marriage, in your parenting, in your school, everywhere you go, you're really thinking like, okay, have we set that reminder? What's our orientation? What's our process for bringing everyone to the table in a way that they feel like they want to contribute and are going to be heard?
Yep.
It changes your whole orientation.
Nichole makes some thoughtful points here about the value of resilience. I particularly like this notion that many of the challenges we face today are ones that we'll not be able to defeat outright. So we'll need to work on ways to come together as strong communities if we want to continue to thrive in the face of inevitable setbacks. She also said something else that I think is worth repeating, that differences make the world better. Now back to our conversation and a discussion of Nichole's podcast. So let's talk about your podcast, Reimagining Us. Some of our listeners have heard about it because we've been happily promoting what you're doing because we think the work is really important. How'd you get the idea? Everybody's podcasting these days, I guess, including myself. But what led you to do it, and why Reimagining Us is a title? Could you tell us the origin story of your podcast?
Well, I wish this was a more like curated story, but the truth is, my co-host is Scott Hutchison from a nonprofit called E Pluribus Unum.
Yeah.
And we've been working together for years, really trying to understand the mental models of Americans when it comes to, being together across differences. And we realized over a couple of years of focus groups and surveys, listen, Americans want to collaborate across differences.
Right.
67% or more of Americans are exhausted by the partisan politics and the polarization. And they know that local solutions require cooperation and they want to do it. and they don't know how. So in focus
Right.
groups, we're talking to these people saying, like, I really want this. I don't see it around me. I'm not sure how to create it or where to get involved, or I'm also overwhelmed. Or what if I do the wrong thing and make
Yeah.
everything worse and get someone canceled or get canceled
Uh,
myself? Or so this sense of paralyzing not sureness,
yeah.
um, coupled with a real desire for change. And we literally one day were like, hold on, why aren't we putting out resources on? Like, why aren't we
Yeah.
doing this? And it just happened that we found support. And literally, like 2 months before the first episode came out, I think, give or take a week or two, we were like, okay, let's do it. Uh,
Yeah.
so
Love
because
it.
we're in this field and this is kind of our day job, it was pretty easy
Yeah.
to say, okay, here's what the arc would look like and who
Yep.
could we bring in. But this was very much a, proposal on a napkin, let's
Yeah.
make it happen tomorrow kind of thing.
Well, yes. And I would say, a lot of the guests I have on the show are working on a wide range of issues. It is that old, you can curse the darkness or you can light a candle. It's just as easy for you to say, yeah, the world's going to hell, everyone's frustrated, and just go on with your day. But you're someone I can tell from your experience in Needham and the work you've done your whole career, and now what you're doing with the podcast. It's like, well, let's do something about this. Someone said to me once that action absorbs anxiety. And, if you're feeling really anxious about a subject, well, do something about it. Get out there and it feels like you're doing that. And I'm wondering if you're having the experience I'm having. I get asked a lot, how do you find all these guests? And I said, that's actually the easy part. There are so many people out there doing great things, doing good work, doing for the right reasons. They just don't get the publicity because it's not salacious. And one of the beauties of this more targeted sort of microcasting that we do with the podcast is you have these platforms and the people are everywhere. And we've already shared names of people we both know in common. I'm assuming you're experiencing the same thing. As you start this work, there's people all over the place, either with the desire or actually acting upon it at the same time.
Yeah, and it makes us, I think, so fortunate, Bill. Like I
Yeah.
often go to bed at night after a hard day of news or things that are happening
Yeah.
locally thinking how lucky I am because
Yeah.
I see all these people who are in it for good, who are
Yeah.
just as you said, their motivations are right, their skills are amazing, they're building beautiful things. And
Yeah.
if I wasn't aware of that,
All right.
I don't know how I might be despairing.
Yeah. No, and I spend my days looking for these good stories. So that's another one. And I talk to people about this a lot. I do it because this is what I'm doing for my life's work at this point. But you can do that on your way to the bank that you work at. Look around, look at, instead of focusing on the person who cut you off in traffic, think about all the people who didn't or let you cut in, or the people helping someone cross the street, or it's everywhere. And then I think it also helps you be more fluid with that kind of response to people. So in the busy checkout line at Christmas time, and you look at the person and say, how's your day going? The person who's scanning furiously, and it's like they've been tasered, and then they smile, and then you have this nice interaction. It definitely, I think, has ripple effects too. So I really like, I'm responding very positive to the way you're focusing locally. And I'll stop after this other thing you made me think of. When you talked about working locally versus nationally, I steal a lot of other people's ideas. And Stephen Covey has written about the circle of influence versus circle of concern. Circle of concern being this big circle, and it takes in the federal government and climate change and these big, scary issues that you should be concerned about, but that you frankly, from 9 in the morning to 5 in the afternoon, can't really influence, if we're honest with
Yeah.
ourselves. But you can influence your family, you can influence your coworkers. So likewise, you can influence the city council in Needham in ways that you cannot influence the United States Senate. And if we can focus on that and feel that action that we're taking is making a difference, I think it would help us all. So that's a lot that I had to say, but I'd love your reaction.
I love that. And in fact, I think it comes full circle to where you started. I don't remember the exact quote, but the idea that when you feel anxious, put your
Yeah.
energies into something and the
Yeah.
anxiety goes away. You feel the purpose. Well, I'm thinking a lot these days as we look out at a hyperpolarized, often inaccurate world of perceptions around us.
Yeah.
In a way, we're all called to dismantle it in our own
Right.
lives and
Right.
communities, and that's like a calling. You know, when you sit it out now, when you retreat and ignore it, it just continues or gets worse.
Right.
But if you speak up with a smile, like you
Yeah.
said, if you
Yeah.
listen even when you disagree, if you show that other way of being, what you do is you extend, you do the ripple effect. And I think with local community, there's the democracy way of looking at it. It's hugely important. And then there's the fact that in this day and age, being a friend, being a neighbor,
Yeah.
showing up
Yeah.
is literally pushing back against those negative patterns around us
Yes.
and
Yes.
protecting our communities.
Yeah.
And that's huge. We are all empowered, just given the fact that we are members in these communities. We are
Absolutely.
empowered to make that change.
When you've mentioned a few times, we have trouble even agreeing on facts and thinking about your local work. And I come from a media background and have great concerns about what's happening to local news in all forms, TV, print, online. In your community work, has that become an issue? Has there been involvement from local media? Because, we can outsource to Associated Press and CNN and these others, but they're not coming to the local town council meeting. They're not reporting on the zoning issue in the downtown of this small town. Is that
Yeah.
something that you're working on or worried about or have a point of view on?
Absolutely. I think it's huge. Like we were saying
Yeah.
earlier, unless you have people in your life who, come from areas of difference across lines of difference, your only exposure to those groups might be a national narrative,
Right.
which isn't even necessarily relevant for your community and
Right.
oftentimes is either biased towards like a certain view, without wanting to be, or is actively involved in mis or disinformation,
Yeah.
for different reasons. And so that doesn't help us bridge divides or even accurately understand where people are. I think local news, it's been shown time and again, is correlated with local cohesion and
Yep.
engagement and
Yep.
all sorts of good things, because the story about the guy who saves the cat in the tree is actually relevant and of interest to people who
Yeah.
live in that neighborhood, right?
Right.
But
Right.
it's not to Reuters or
Right.
the AP.
Right.
And and so I think that's really important. We have been fortunate. Actually, one of our cohort, our hub leaders at the NRN, started a local online newspaper after
Oh,
we
wow.
lost our local news
Oh,
in
wow.
Needham. And
Okay.
and it was neat because this, 30 strong table was able to to get that out there, and
Yeah.
it would have taken off anyway. I think people were hungry for local news. But yes, it has been an answer. If you want to share information in a community and there's only social media,
Yeah.
that's a problem, right?
Yeah.
So it has been a big cohesive element for us.
Okay. You mentioned social media. Let's go there. When people say what's changed, what's different, what's the problem, I think social media came on with this great promise of bringing us all together, and I would argue there are some amazing applications of social media, and I frankly use it to get the message out about the work I'm doing. It's very accessible, but at the same time, it can really tear people down and add to division. Where do you come out on that? Have you used social media in positive ways in the work you're doing, or let's just talk about your thoughts, what you've studied over your career and the work you're doing. Where do you come out on social media?
I will only reinforce what I think many people in my field have to say, that the way social media has been designed to date is the priorities for organizing the platforms have really been around getting users and making money,
Yep.
right?
Yep.
And so when you're making choices about algorithms, you're going to make the choice that will activate or trigger or engage someone, whether or not it's good or bad, right?
Yep.
It
Yep.
might be that focusing on difference and moral outrage
Yep.
is what builds your platform.
It works.
And
Yep.
even if you have good intentions as a business entrepreneur, your kind of first priority is business.
Yeah.
So I think that we have, unfortunately, we have platforms that weren't designed for community life.
Right.
They literally weren't. But now we're starting to see some that are. And I'm I'm not an expert in this, but I will say I just read the most incredible speech by a guy named Eli Pariser.
Hmm.
He's got a platform. He was giving a speech to the Pope, actually,
Okay.
talking about this question: should we just throw
Huh.
social media out because it's
Huh.
only harmful? And his argument was, no. We've spent years now studying it, and we've built a platform that is based on principles of good listening and
Mm.
building up, and different algorithms. And I think people are so aware
Yeah.
of the problems with social media that maybe we're ready.
Yeah. I had a guest, a man named Chris Anderson, who is still in charge of, he curates the TED series, TED Talks. And he wrote a book called Infectious Generosity. And he's a very, very lovely guy, British accent, so he sounds even smarter than he is. He's a very
Yeah.
smart guy. And he said, I was so excited at the dawn of social media, what TED has been able to do with democratizing those speeches and making them free and all this stuff. And he said, we all know what it's become. But he's sort of challenging everyone. He's like, well, let's take it back. And instead of, making all these terrible things go viral, this is where the title comes from. Let's share stories about generosity and goodness and infectious generosity. And it's one of the things I keep coming back to is I overuse the analogy of you're on the street, it's time for lunch. There's a junk food store and there's a health food store. If you go to the junk food store, don't blame the junk food store. We have some agency in this. Don't keep liking these awful things. Don't follow people that make you feel terrible. Don't forward things that are going to make them feel terrible. And I've done that in my own life. When I started this work, I cleaned up my social media feeds. The algorithms work the other way too. They can spin you into so many good stories. I start finding people like you and others, and then I post about them and I share them. All of a sudden, it's like, here they come. They want my eyeballs. And if every time you like something, that's a vote. And if I vote for the stuff that's going to make me feel good and bring people together, you get more of it. It actually does work.
Yep. I There's a new group called Front Porch. It's like a platform like Nextdoor,
Yes.
but it has those algorithms, and I know that it's
Oh,
being
I love it.
intensively studied right now, and
Oh,
and
wow.
so far it's looking really great. I think it's in Vermont. I'm not sure how quickly it's going to get in other places, but
Oh,
I think we'll
interesting.
see more and more opportunities to engage with better social media.
I agree wholeheartedly with Nichole when she says that many Americans are exhausted by division and isolation and truly want to come together. I also agree with her that she and I are lucky to do the work we do because we see every day people doing great things to address these very challenges. And she makes an excellent point that even the very smallest acts, like being a good friend, help push back against some of the negative trends we see around us. And I'll put in a plug here for supporting local news. If we want people to come together and our local communities and broader democracy to survive and thrive, we need good, honest, fact-based journalism. These businesses around the country are challenged and they deserve our support. Now, back to my final segment with Nichole Argo. I can't tell you how many people, either I tell them what I'm doing with Optimism, is, oh, we need more of that. Or if you ask people, what do you think about social media? Oh, I can't put it down. It just makes me feel, everybody's feeling the same way, I think. And this will bring me back to, you mentioned earlier you wrote a paper called the Belonging Barometer. So it seems to me that barometer implies that this thing will ebb and flow and change, and high pressure, low pressure.
Right.
Where do you feel like you have a sense for where we are with that? Is pressure rising? Is it lowering? Do you have a sense for what moment we're in right now, or is it just too chaotic right now to even really judge?
Oh no, I never think that. I mean, that's the beauty of barometers, right? Or any type of measure
Yeah,
is you can diagnose, you can say where are we, how does this compare to where we were before,
yeah,
or specific measures might differ.
yes,
So we're not, listen, at the level of local community, which we've focused mostly on in this conversation. We learned in a 2023 national survey, a nationally representative survey, that people's felt experience of local belonging was lower than national belonging, family or friend belonging, and workplace belonging. We were
really,
surprised by that. Um,
wow,
and that could be an artifact of COVID. It's also the heights
sure,
of just, not being together.
yep,
And in fact, some follow up surveys, there's a state level survey in Colorado with slightly higher levels of local level belonging,
okay,
but still we're talking about sometimes less than half the population that feels belonging at the local level, and
yeah,
that's a huge proportion.
yeah,
And in our local level survey in Needham, we also found we had higher than national levels of belonging at the
hmm,
local level, so it
okay,
seemed like there was more cohesion than in some places. But we found a huge difference in belonging. It's a 1 to 5 point scale,
yep,
and we found a whole entire point difference between white and non-white populations, which tells us as a community, there's some work to be done.
yep,
And the only other thing I would say on that is part of the process of writing that report was understanding, like, what is a usable construct for belonging. And I
yeah,
think people, all of us know the pain of non-belonging. Everyone's
yes,
had that feeling of
sure,
exclusion, but we tend to think of belonging as a fuzzy kumbaya thing. And what we realized is, if it's not, it's this
yeah,
multifaceted, really important concept. And even to the extent, I don't know if you remember Maslow's hierarchy of
yep,
needs.
yep. I can't
So,
recite them, but I remember the concept.
yeah, the
Belonging is one of them, right?
triangle, water and food, that's right, were the
Yes,
number
yes,
one. And then
yes,
above that, security and safety. And the third level was belonging and love. And
yep,
today's scholars, who are many of them Maslow's students, have flipped that so that belonging and love are
ah,
now at the number one position.
yep,
And the reason for that is because if you don't feel you belong, if you're not part of a group that's got your back, you may
yeah,
not get food or safety. And what also means is, like, what does that look like? And the barometer that we talked about with this national survey really measured three things. One is connection. We're
yep,
all aware of that.
yep,
Emotionally attached to a certain space, you feel included, etc. But the other two are not things that people have often put with belonging. And one of them, I know you had Amy Edmondson
yes, I
on a
did,
little while ago. So
yes,
one of them is psychological safety,
yep,
the sense that we can disagree and still be valued, that
yep,
we're not put at risk. We can make mistakes. We can be our whole self, even if, it doesn't work with everybody. Um, and this is a huge part of belonging, because otherwise you won't bring yourself to the table.
right,
And then the third one was what we call co-creation. Some people call it agency. It's that
okay,
idea that you can influence decisions in your setting. So that's a pretty high bar. I
yeah,
sometimes call it radical belonging, because
huh,
even in families, we may not have a super high score. Like, you can imagine feeling really connected, but unable to influence decisions, or feeling really connected and able to influence decisions, but not able to disagree with others. So you
Right.
actually don't use that power you might have. There's
Right.
all sorts of combinations of this. And it differs by settings. We have many settings in our lives.
So, Nichole, I know there are people listening and thinking, gosh, I'd love to have this work done in my community. We need what you described happened in Needham. In addition to listening to Reimagining Us, which I assume is available wherever you get your podcast, how might someone connect with Together Up? How might someone access the tools and the training and the work that you do, if that's of interest?
We are building out our website.
Yep.
And over the next literally 2 weeks, 2 to 3 weeks, so maybe even by the time this goes live, I don't know,
Yes.
there will be a variety of resources on the website. There will even be a quiz that people can take to find out, like, personality wise, what are the best ways for them to get involved, and then have resources for that. If people are interested in understanding, like, how this work is being done, we've just partnered with the Council on Foundations to do a report called Coming Together, Not Apart.
Great.
And it's report number 2. It's tells these stories of the ways that belonging and pluralism is being brought to life throughout the country. And there's more. We have measures. There's, of course, the belonging barometer, and there's another. We'll soon be putting out another way of measuring impact at a local level. We'll be putting out case studies, like what happened in Needham and what were the impacts, and even a little later this year, an off-the-shelf guidebook. So you could sit in your community and be like, I want to build this, and here's the way to do it.
Fantastic. Well, I think you're really onto something. You are meeting this moment. I know that people listening are going to be feeling this pent-up desire to take action in the areas that you have and will be accessing your resources. So thank you so much for your time today and for all the work you're doing. I look forward to following it and supporting you however we can, because it's really important. Thank you very much.
Likewise, Bill. And I look forward to listening to your podcast as that inspiration and energy for keeping all of this going. We all affect each other, don't we?
We sure do. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Take care.
Take care. It had been a while since I thought about Maslow's hierarchy, and I was interested to hear that people are starting to move belonging up the list. It probably makes that much more sense today in a society where the majority of us do have our basic needs for food and shelter taken care of. And I appreciated Nichole connecting to our episode with Amy Edmondson on psychological safety and reminding us that if we're going to break down some of the barriers keeping us all apart, people need to feel comfortable speaking their mind in a setting that's safe. Great advice all the way around. I hope you enjoyed this blue sky conversation with Nichole Argo. Before you go, please leave us a rating and review. And if you haven't already, consider subscribing to this podcast to be sure you don't miss any future episodes. Following the Optimism Institute on social media will also keep you in the know, as will signing up for our monthly newsletter, Blue Sky Weekend. My thanks, as always, goes out to Crush Graphics, the design firm behind the Optimism Institute and Blue Sky podcast. To learn more about their great work, go to crushgraphics.com, and that's Crush with a K. And all editing and mixing for Blue Sky are done by the great team at Sound On, Sound Off. They make my job easy, and you can learn more about them at soundonsoundoff.com. Until next time, I'm the founder of the Optimism Institute and host of Blue Sky, Bill Burke, and I thank you for listening.